Welcome to the virtual office hours, everyone. As most of you now know, my name is John Fia. I teach American history and chair the history department here at Messiah College. Although I am off this year on sabbatical, but that does not mean that the virtual office hours will not continue to go on. Abby Blakeney, our producer, is behind the camera. Say hello, Abby. Pretty soon we're going to get her to do that automatically. Right now, this is her second episode that she produced. So send if you enjoy the office hours, send positive comments her way on the blog. This fall and maybe into the spring, as I mentioned last week, we are talking about this idea that's near and dear to the heart of me and the readers of The Way of Improvement Leads Home. The topic of a book that I wrote, Was America Founded as a Christian Nation? And as I said last week, we are expecting the second edition this coming summer, next summer. So I thought it might be a good way to revisit this topic, think about some of the themes of that book, think about some of the ways I'm going to revise the book, and maybe even, I've been thinking about this over the course of the week, maybe even thinking about the way this Christian nation theme is appearing in American politics today, especially since we're coming up on an election year, and a lot of the hype about that election year has already begun with the recent GOP Republican debate and the other debates that are coming up. Today what I want to do is get us some solid footing here. And actually the footing is not going to be very solid, but it's going to be at least an introduction to our discussion. And that is how, when we talk about America being founded as a Christian nation, or when those who do talk about America being founded as a Christian nation, when they use that phrase, when they ask that question, what are some of the ways in which that question might be answered? Now, we can't get into all of the possibilities here in a short video like this. Well, how would you define what makes a nation Christian? I think these are not only kind of political questions, maybe even theological questions, but they can also be historical questions. How do we define a nation? Right? At what point does the United States become a nation? How do we define America, or the United States of America? But I think when you throw out this idea that somehow America was a Christian nation or founded as a Christian nation, there are several possibilities that you often hear thrown around. I think first is the idea that somehow Christianity is the established religion of the United States of America. That, of course, there's very few people, I don't know of anybody actually, even the most extreme defenders of the Christian nationalist view, that would take that position, because it essentially violates the disestablishment clause of the First Amendment, right? There shall be no established church in the United States. You could argue that America was a Christian nation. Maybe you can even argue it still is a Christian nation if you go by demographics. For example, the majority of people in the 18th century and today in the United States identify themselves in one way or another as Christians. This, of course, then becomes problematic. How do you define a Christian? Is it someone who sort of goes to church? Is it someone who's had a conversion experience? Is it someone who was baptized? Is it someone who was raised in a Christian home? All kinds of varieties of Christianity. But that might be one way of saying, yes, we're a Christian nation. We were founded as a Christian nation because most of the people in the 18th century were Christians. Another way of thinking about this possibly is to think about the idea that Christians, or somehow the laws of the United States, right, are rooted in some kind of Judeo-Christian tradition, liberty, freedom. These things are deeply grounded somehow in the Christian faith, or maybe even in Protestantism of some way. And thus the Founding Fathers were drawing upon some kind of Christian ideals or Christian roots of liberty that were just kind of floating around and were the common way of thinking, the common language at the time of the 18th century. You could argue that even though there wasn't an establishment, that somehow Christianity was privileged over other religions by the Founding Fathers, and some would even say even that should be the case today. Not necessarily it's the established church. We don't pay taxes to support Christian ministers, But some might argue that Christianity should be more privileged than others, whether it be in your understanding of marriage, whether it be in your understanding of which holidays are celebrated, kids get off from school for which holidays, and so forth. This is a nation that privileges Christianity over others. You hear this a lot, particularly among those associated with the Christian right. So these are just some of the ways in which we can talk about, was America founded as a Christian nation, and the way it's often used by those who are trying to make these arguments. Next time, hopefully we'll see, unless my mind changes between now and then, we'll get into some examples of the ways throughout American history that people have argued or defended the idea that America is or was a Christian nation. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.